Hello, everybody. This is Waldorf,
And this is Statler.
and today we're talking about the Ninth Age wish list.
All we want for Christmas is a few little
A
changes.
few little rules. This is just kind of a list of things we would like to see changed in the game. By no means do we intend this as a criticism of what's been done up to this point.
As you can tell by our channel, we're all in on the Ninth Age. Our
Yes.
respective gaming groups are all in on the Ninth Age, and we see it as continually growing in our area and probably in the States in general. So we have a lot of. We're really into the game, and we just want to see it advance.
Yes, definitely.
And these are kind of our observations, as much as we've played, the games that we've watched, etc., of things that would make it even better than it already is.
Correct. And this is kind of a lot of this comes as a kind of a consensus as well as out of our gaming groups that we play with.
Right.
Talking with them, sitting around. So, having said that, again, this is not a criticism at all. Having said that, let's see what we have. Oops, look at that. First thing we have is a mistake.
Yes. And it won't be the last.
Yes, we're good at that. So, army composition. First point we have is end hero hammer.
Yeah, this is kind of one of the things that Ninth Age has done is it's got the 50% characters and 35% lords.
Correct.
Which is kind of similar to Warhammer 8th and how it kind of ended up.
Yes.
And the challenge with this is that with so many points dedicated to characters, at least in the games that I tend to see, you tend to see a lot of points being spent on characters.
Correct.
And people are using the characters to do a lot of things. Well, slight little helps are one thing, but when you get to the point where you get these either unkillable characters or it's all about fighting just characters, monsters, and things of that nature,
Right.
it just changes the nature of the game to be less tactical and more gotcha.
Yes, this is my big guy and he got into the fight, now you're dead.
It's like yes, and I dare you to figure out how to kill him.
Right.
So, and that's not just so much about a maneuver. And then your unit is nothing more than a way to keep that guy around so he doesn't get picked off. So,
Correct.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my general has a 2-up rerollable armor save and a 4-up ward save, and he's going to pile into your unit, and
he's got
luck.
5 attacks, and they're all multi-wound, and you have to reroll your ward saves, and
And just good luck. Yeah. So, I mean, the hero hammer is what we're talking about.
Right.
50% is way too high on heroes. I mean, for the total hero points.
Yeah, I think I'd like to see, instead of having the 35 and then total of 50, is it closer to be like, maybe a third for the entire group. And there are advantages to some armies to taking heroes and not taking lords, and vice versa.
Even if the, I mean, at one point the comp was, earlier in Warhammer 8, comp for a while was 25% lords, 25% heroes.
Exactly.
Even that would bring it down, because that would drastically bring down the lords.
Exactly.
That would mean instead of 3 lords, you're seeing 2, and they're not quite as beefed up as they can be. But I think the 35% overall pool would be the better solution.
And the really powerful lords are not that much more expensive quite often than I'll call it the mid-level fighty lords. And it's more the fighty lords that it shows up with. And I actually have to say, I wouldn't mind seeing that the army composition wasn't a general rule; it was actually tied to the army itself. So armies with I'll call it crappier troops, in general,
have better heroes.
Would have better heroes to make up for.
Correct.
Armies with more, generally that are more elite, would have more troops and less maybe powerful heroes, but less of them. Kind of makes me think of like Lord of the Rings. If you read Lord of the Rings books, you can't even remember all of the heroes for good, and they're the ones that are usually doing all the good fighting.
Yeah.
There just aren't that many evil heroes.
No,
because
they're not.
they have so many guys, and the guys are pretty good. So it'd be neat, if that's complicated. Maybe in the shorter term, it's just to reduce it to the 25
or
even
35 overall.
Yeah,
or whatever,
35 overall. But just cut it down so it was more about maneuvering the units.
in the long term, this, like you said, this army needs a boost more for heroes because their troops are crappy.
Right.
Yeah.
And not because right now there's other ways which we'll talk about that they're trying to boost armies, which causes other challenges.
Yep. Next point we have is special and rare
They need to be special and rare.
Special and rare, because they're not. Typically, it's referred to all the time in tournament players as, oh, I made my core tax,
Right.
which is my 25% core, which, I'm at 600, typically a 2,500 point army. We're talking about 625 in core, and it is usually
625
within
or 628.
a few points of 625. And then the army's built up of special and rare.
Exactly.
And the special and rare are just so much better.
And they end up being the primary fighting units.
Correct. And they're the units that are going to be
because they tend to be, you get 40 units of elite infantry or fighting against 40 guys that aren't elite. Well, you know how it's going to go. You're always going to take those. You're going to try to make your powerful units those stronger units in general.
Right. And the special, quite frankly, you see the special units, they're as large as far as number of troops in them as most of the common.
And so are most of the rare.
As in core, and the rare as well.
Within an army,
And that's kind of that. They're better troops, but anyway, it's just they don't feel special or rare.
Right, they feel
at all.
It's more like these are the main guys,
right.
And the core guys in most armies are the guys you just have to take for other purposes.
Yep.
And I think there's that things that can be done there, as you pointed out. One is, maybe the special and the rares don't have the same cap on points totals, and they have to be a little bit smaller. So
correct.
You can't form your main battle blocks around those. They become more. Your central battle block, I should say.
I would really like to see a rare unit be 10 guys. If it's a normal 20, 25 millimeter guy, 10 guys. That's a special. That's a rare unit.
Well, then you have a lot of units
so much
exactly.
Better.
Well, then there's the other thing on the upside. You have like ballistic shooters and like elven armies.
Right.
They're all on rare now. Well, they're the better archers, and they're usually the ones you want to take. But okay, are they really rare? They're not really rare for the army.
How rare are they? Yes.
How rare are they? Since there's other mechanisms in the game currently, one of a kind, and two for this choice and all this, that you can deal with that. You don't need to push them into a rare slot where you would hope to see like special, actually, really real super special kind of guys.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then at that point, do you really need a special and rare category?
Right.
Do you just have a core and a other troop category?
Exactly.
Or something to that effect.
And I think that comes into just a general composition.
Below. Yeah.
Do you I guess we can jump to that one. Break away from the 8th Army comp.
Correct.
8th Army.
8th edition.
8th edition comp.
Eighth
we have
Army.
a typo.
8th edition Army comp.
Yes.
You just left out a word.
Yeah, there you go. And Ninth Age really is a very different game than old Warhammer 8th edition in most ways. It plays similarly, but there's a lot of subtle differences, a lot of strong differences. But the one thing that it's still very much the same is Army Comp.
Army Comp.
And frankly, it's, if we go far enough back, it used to be, you've got so many units and this many percentage. It used to be at one point in time you had a percentage. But there's other systems that you see in the marketplace that do it in different ways.
Correct.
Like you have the Kings of War approach, which you take one of this type of unit, you can
unlock another type.
You can get some of these things. You have others it's just straight points. You pay a little bit of a point premium for the better units, more so commensurate, more of like a tax on the better units. So.
Right.
They actually cost you a little more. So there's little different ways to do it. You could very easily take it in the context of you have to take a core, but the core unlocks a special, or 2 cores unlock a rare or whatever. So you're getting more of the core troops, and then it makes those other units a little rare. Of course, it also probably means that some of the things that are currently in special that maybe aren't so special should move in the
move
core.
Back down to core or whatever. Yes. I agree. And like I said, the unit, especially to me, one of the big things that just sticks out so much is the unit sizes. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't look right that I've got a block of 40 rare guys or 40 special guys, and I've got 3 or 4 blocks of 20 core guys.
Which brings us to the third bullet, which is back to slaying Death Stars. 8th edition was really in a lot of ways about your Death Star versus my Death Star, and I had some chaff around there, maybe some other supporting units.
Correct.
And Ninth Age has moved away from that a certain degree, but you still see a good number of Death Stars.
Still see a good number of Death
And
Stars.
frankly, with some of the stat creeps and some of the additional weapons that you have,
Right.
in some ways are actually worse.
Yeah, and this we'll talk about this later on. It'll come in there as well. And the Death Stars are encouraged by the rules simply because you've got a lot of characters that buff units.
Correct.
So therefore, you end up stacking
You start
units
stacking.
into
Right.
units to stack those buffs. So anyway, the Death Stars are still a problem. They're still there. I mean, I've seen plenty of armies that, you know, if you don't take this unit, that's 1,500 points of my 2,500 point
Right.
list. You're not going to win if you can't take this unit.
Exactly. So it should be, I mean, is it harder to build those, especially with rare and special type
Yeah,
units.
and they're usually built around a rare or special unit.
Correct, correct. And the last one, since we went out of order here, is
Yeah.
really is the Empower Warband play. So there's currently some rules in Ninth Age for warbands.
There are.
However, in reality, with the standard comp, it's kind of hard to play them at a really small entry-level point game. We're actually going to do a video probably in another few weeks on a game a multiplayer game we've done with people with small number of points, and we've made it quick adjustments. But the standard, you've got to take 2 core. You've got minimal unit sizes, which in some cases are relatively large for a warbands game.
Yeah.
That makes you can't even take certain units, or you can only afford one of them. That really needs to probably be tweaked. So we need to think about the army comp for warbands a little differently, not just it's a few less units, but
Correct.
it has to be the units themselves has to change a little bit.
The units themselves need to be kind of, I mean, like we talked about doing, one of the things we talked about doing was lowering the minimum size unit by
Right.
half and then reducing the maximum size by half. That way you don't have some guy taking one huge
Right.
horde formation.
And you can still play with a lot of the base troops, even in a 500 point game, or if you want to play that. And I think that's something that deserves focus, because part of the argument about playing Ninth is the cost of entry.
Yes.
You've got to buy a lot of models.
Well,
You got
that's-
to paint a lot of models, and it takes a long time to get people. Or you play with people who don't paint anything, which you and I won't do.
Yeah. I mean,
So-
that's part of the problem. The reason 8th edition Warhammer went away, in my opinion, is there's just such a high entry fee to get into
It was,
this.
and I think GW saw that, and they came up with their own solution, which made a lot of people mad.
Yes.
But the one thing that it did do is it made it that anyone could get a few models and start playing the game right away.
Right.
And there's no reason, in my opinion, that 9th edition can't do that. It's just a formation game. You just need smaller formations.
Correct.
And maybe a few less of them. And I think that's something when they start talking about doing the entry level rules instead of just trying to simplify existing rules. You need to do something about army comp so people can come in and play small games and have a good time.
Yeah. Get involved, play a small game, have a
Right.
good time, and then move up from there.
And it also allows you, and you need to actually reinforce that probably with multiplayer considerations.
Correct.
So you
That's a good
don't
point.
you don't have to play. Maybe you want to play a game with 4 of your buddies or 3 of your buddies.
Right.
And you're all going to take a few points. You want to be able to do that, but you don't want to use each other's general necessarily. But you don't want to have command spans that cover the entire board, so leadership doesn't matter.
Correct.
You don't want everyone having their own power dice for magic, or
yeah.
it gets out of crate. So you have to do shared results and those things. And those are all relatively very simple additional rules. I think that can be done in the 9th Age, and it really make it kind of interesting,
Right.
actually.
And one thing you'll see that we've talked about, and we will talk about more, is like the last bullet point. We kind of moved it up the top, but just breaking away from 8th edition in general.
Yes.
There's a lot of, and you will see this when we talk about some of the army books as well. I think a lot of the design and a lot of the people that are on the forums are really just hung up on their, Warhammer 8th edition rules and ideas
how things work,
and
yes.
how things work and how things should still work, and rather than just this is a new game.
Exactly.
This is a new game, and these things aren't required to stick around.
Exactly. And, I mean, it doesn't mean you have to throw out everything. You
Right.
shouldn't. If there's good things, you should keep them. But you don't have to do things exactly the same way.
Correct. And you don't have to do things just because they've always been that way.
Exactly.
Done
And,
that way.
and to a large degree, when we talk about the rules, I said, Ninth Age doesn't do that. But when we get into the armies and how they're built, it still kind of, I think,
somewhat does. To a
somewhat
certain
does. And that's understandable at this phase in the development,
Correct.
just because so much work had to be done by, few people just to turn things around.
Yeah,
so
to get things moving.
to get things moving. So that's understood. And that's why we put this out here as our, our future wishes. And we joke on the Christmas, but somewhat true, because they're not really going to probably consider this until September, until ETC is over, and it's probably going to be 3 months of a little tweaking here and there
Tweakings, yes.
as they address some of the minor problems that they've uncovered on balance, etc. So
Right.
yeah.
Hope so. So moving on. Oops, that doesn't do it, does it?
Move to something.
Next, moving on, we have the pregame logistics.
Logistica.
First bullet point in here is reward dynamic play styles. This is kind of a catch-all thing. We want to have the scenarios, the built-in things that are into the game, encourage movement, encourage, other types of gameplay other than the move forward and slug it out.
Something like that. Gun lines, Death Stars, those things.
Correct.
And that's with some of it's the scenarios. I mean, we have three basic scenarios, which is, okay.
Right.
But then you have the scenario victory comps,
The
and,
four,
and how they work. And those can probably use maybe some additional options or some tweaks. So you have different play styles. So you can't just take one big mega unit
Yes.
and win the game.
Correct.
Some people argue in some cases, with some of the objective things, well, you don't have to do that. But chances are, well, if I can park on one and I'm going to be sweeping your guys out of the way anyway, you can't keep them all away from me.
Correct.
And then at the end, I just get in that zone.
Yeah, and that's where the next point is. Objectives should not encourage Death Stars,
Exactly.
which is, there's one, the main one, which is capture the center of the board. I mean, that's a Death Star scenario.
Exactly.
It's you just go park your Death Star on there and say,
Right.
"Come get me."
And then your opponent has to open that they've got MSU and they can avoid you and then move. And they have the last turn.
And get the last turn and move into that zone on the
know.
very last turn.
Right. Then is that, and even the standard one kind of has that impact. Well, you've only got two standards: the Death Star and the BSB in that unit. Well,
Right.
good luck killing one of those. So
True, yes.
yeah,
Yeah. Meanwhile, you're killing off other stuff.
right.
All right. What else do we have? Add the option for mystical terrain.
Yeah, right
One-
now,
Yeah.
that was something I guess Eighth had and Age of Sigmar had. I'm using the bad word, I know, but is that not all terrain is just straightforward. It just slows down movement and it's dangerous terrain. Now, while it may not be something for tournament play, or may not be, for non-tournament play, it just adds flavor to the game and it adds tactical decisions. Oh, I can't go next to that well because something bad happens when I get back,
Or-
when I go to it, or something good might happen.
I have to make that choice.
I have
if
to
I
make
go
that
near
choice,
that,
right.
if I need to get this advantage to get over to this flank, but there's this thing there.
Exactly.
Now, I've seen, in a lot of our local one-day tournaments, they've done, we've definitely reduced the terrain. I mean, we have, actually, lately we've been playing with no mystical terrain at all.
Right.
But even towards the end of 8th edition, Warhammer, we were playing one-day tournaments where there was one piece on each board.
Right.
And it was the same on every board, but that one piece did something in the game.
Exactly.
It was one of the pieces of mystical terrain. I don't like the thing where there was
No, I don't want all 8 pieces
five,
to be
sixes,
yeah,
random
crazy.
magical
Yeah,
pieces out there.
It's a bit much.
But at night, one little thing out on the board that does something.
One or maybe even
I think
two. Something
adds flavor to the
It
game.
adds
I think.
flavor and adds more tactical decisions that you have to make.
Correct. Next thing we have as far as the battlefield and pregame logistics is the limiting the effects of buildings
Right.
in competitive. It says in competitive play, but in general as well. Buildings, I can stick my I can stick my 40 orcs into a 4x4 building sitting on the middle of the chart.
Yep.
In the middle of the board.
40 orc archers.
Yeah. Of course, I'm only getting 15 shots out of it, which is
Yes.
another point as well. But yeah, it's like, come and get me. Come try to kick me out of this. So
You're going to send so many guys in at a time.
yeah, the buildings definitely. I think buildings definitely need a maximum unit size allowed in them, whatever that is. I also think that 15 shots out of a building, no matter what size it is or whatever, is a little much, because it's just such a great position to move a unit of 20 handgunners or something into a building, and now that unit has multiplied its effectiveness, because normally it's only shooting forward arc, and now it's got a 360 arc and 15 shots. So anyway,
Buildings are tricky, especially. I actually think that when you're having a fun game, you can do fun things with buildings. You can say things. Where's the doors? How many windows does it have? And you can play WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get.
You shoot one or two guys out of each opening.
Yeah, whatever it is, you can do that, and you see that in a lot of games. It's basically you can shoot two guys out of every opening.
Yeah, a lot of the war games we play.
Yes,
that way.
That's a simple mechanic, and it's only so big.
Right.
And usually if they fit in, they fit in. If they can't fit in, they can't go in there.
Right.
Those are simple mechanics you often see. Now, I have to say that the 9th Age building rules are much better than the old Warhammer 8th Edition building rules. But still, when you get in a tournament, that can be even more problematic, I think, on how buildings work. You stick an objective in there, or you, or you don't have an army. Say you're playing Kingdom of Equity and you got all mounted guys. How are you going to get that guy out of that building? So,
right.
You don't have the mechanisms. If you've got some monstrous infantry in there, it's pretty hard to. They're hard enough to fight as it is. Getting them out of a building is even harder.
Even harder.
Yeah.
Yes. Being able to stomp guys in a building is
being
a
able
little
to stomp
much.
is
I'm hiding my building, and you're somehow stomping your foot through my window and stepping on me.
Exactly.
I'm not a big fan of that.
Yeah. But not causing any damage to the building. You can't burn buildings down. That's
you can't
you see that in some mechanics that you can take them down. So,
and war machines don't do anything to the building itself.
Exactly. They do some damage to the guys inside, but even that's not that much unless you have a small unit.
Correct.
It's a lot of times. Buildings to me, in the tournament play, it shouldn't even be occupied. It should be like
impassable terrain.
Impassable blocking terrain.
Correct.
You just can't enter them.
Right.
It just makes things easier. But something needs to be done. I'd almost say that don't allow them to be used in competitive play, and then make the rules a little bit more WYSIWYG and for fun games.
For fun games.
Yeah.
And you always have the option of doing this as doing your club rule, whatever in that. But club rules always have that downside of, like I said, it's a club rule. When you introduce a new player, you got to go over a list of club rules, and some of those club rules turn off players.
Well, there's even that, and I've seen that argument in a lot of games. I've never been a fan of club rules, because that's great if you only play in your club.
Correct.
As soon as you want to go to a convention or play in a tournament, well, those other people don't play your club rules.
That's correct. And
so now you've been playing it a different way, and club rules tend to change play style also.
They do.
So it impacts you on how you play, and you don't even realize it. When you go into another forum, and all of a sudden,
right.
How you play doesn't even work anymore.
Yeah.
Or you anger your opponent because he doesn't think you know the rules, because you've gotten so used to
your
the club rules.
Yeah. Yeah. I can tell you. I played in our groups for years with never going to a tournament. Yeah. And then I went to a tournament, and it was like, this is an entirely different world. These guys play an entirely different game than I do. Yeah. Because, we had our set 15, 20 people that I play, and it was all in this area. They all played kind of the same way, and, things were established and worked a certain way.
Exactly.
Even tactics,
Absolutely.
Anyway, so but buildings need to change somehow.
Yeah.
Which moves us on to models, units, and formations.
So there's a number of things that once again, I think these are holdovers from 8th edition. Start with the first one's hordes. Hordes were created, in my opinion, in 8th edition by GW as a way to sell additional models. So
there's always been the infantry creep.
right,
In,
none of us had blocks of 40 or 50 guys, except for the occasional goblin player.
Correct.
Before 8th edition, we had 25s and 20s, and maybe the big unit might be 30. You know,
Yes.
and it was in a block. It wasn't in this 4 rank deep thing.
Right.
And the idea of that, just because I'm 10 wide or 6 for monstrous, I get an extra rank.
You mean to give an extra attack?
Yeah,
A
a
rank
tank of
that
attack.
fights.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that doesn't make any sense. You know.
Being wider should not make me more
Right.
effective fighting.
And this, of course, what does this support? This supports Death Stars again.
Yes.
You got more attacks, and that makes it even scarier for the game. Particularly for models that already have good number of attacks and
Yeah.
high strength attacks. It's
Yeah.
just, positively frightening.
It is.
Now, you don't see that with the Monstrous Infantry so much anymore in 9th
Because they've trimmed the numbers.
they've trimmed the maximum number, but you still see it with certain elite guys.
Right.
And it's like, I don't think it's needed. Just because, why should you have to form up in this particular formation? There are maybe units you can give an extra rank rule to,
Right.
goblins or elves or whatever. That's a special rule for that particular unit. I think that works fine.
Yes.
But to make it a generic rule, you need to be 10
Yeah.
wide.
And the rule's there. It's fight in extra ranks. I
Yes.
mean, the rule is there.
Exactly.
Just apply it to units rather than
And then make it a
formations.
generic one. So then you don't have, the 3 ranks of strength 5 guys, fighting you.
Right.
So I think that the horde rule should just go away. I don't think it has a place any longer.
Okay. I agree. And, while we're there, let's bump the bottom one up again.
Yes. It kind of talks about the next one too, so it's really
yeah.
in the same context.
It is. But, yeah, the conga lines and the 5 model wide rule. 5 model wide is fine for a minimum size to gain a rank bonus from. But, why do we have these units that are 5 wide? It's a unit of 50. It's 5 wide. It's 10 ranks
10,
deep.
10 ranks deep. Just so it can
It's
throw its bodies out in front.
correct. A simple rule where you cannot be no more deep than you are wide.
Or maybe one more rank than you have files or something like that.
Right.
Would take care of the problem. Actually, Warthrone has that rule. They have formations and
Right.
those rules where you're allowed to form in line or column, and it tells you what you can do with it at a form level.
At a formation.
It doesn't say it to be exactly 5 wide. For those of us that played before, it was 4. It used to be 4 wide.
4 wide, correct.
It was only when I tried to push the units bigger that it went to 5 wide. So
more of that
why does it
model
have to be
creep.
5? Why does it have to be 4? Why can't it just be, if you're 3 wide, you're 3 wide. If you're 8 wide, you're 8 wide.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't matter.
Yes.
All the rule can just be that your width and your depth. You cannot be deeper than you are wide.
Right. Or one except. You can
yeah.
be one deeper or one deeper than you are wide.
Right, and as you take casualties, you get thinner, and same thing will happen.
Right.
And I think that's a more elegant way to deal with it. It also makes you do more interesting things with your unit. So it's not always I'm either 10 or I'm 5.
Right.
You'll see.
Right.
Not that you don't see 6s and 7s. It's just there's less reasons to play 7s if you can get to 10 with a bigger unit because you get that
Yes.
extra rank. Which
Yeah.
we talk about. You get rid of the horde. You won't see that anymore.
won't
You won't
see that.
you won't see 10 wide hardly anymore.
No.
Why would you
it's
want
so
that?
unwieldy.
Right.
Especially with your 10 wide,
Right.
25 millimeter
Exactly.
guys.
But
that
then
I'm
you'll see
used to using.
these bigger, and you won't see these units that are just so deep.
Yeah.
It's just a hacking contest.
Correct. And they're deep, so deep for other reasons because they
Right.
want to be steadfast for years.
Sure.
Is what the reasoning behind it. And again, they need to be steadfast for years because they're facing up against these elite units that have as many guys as they do.
Exactly.
So, anyway, it's kind of it's hand in hand,
Right. And that
And
brushes to the conga
conga
line.
line.
And the challenge with conga line is a lot of times it doesn't matter, but sometimes it does. When you're
does.
unbreakable, it matters a lot.
When you're unbreakable or stubborn,
Or
conga
stubborn,
lines are
basically.
huge.
It matters a lot. Now
Right.
you're using it as a game mechanic You can't kill enough of my guys to make me crumble because I'm only you want so many guys can get on you.
You only get 3 or 4 guys on you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm never going to go away just because I have this other rule.
Right.
So if you
And again, the conga line goes away with the wide as you are deep.
exactly, and it just goes away. You just don't see that anymore. So those units have to fight a little bit better than they did.
Yeah. All right. Anything else on models? I
No.
think that's it, right? Movement. What do we have? Random movement charges.
Movement charges.
All right.
The Death Zone.
The Death Zone.
Death Blossom, if for those
Death
people who ever
Blossom.
watched the 1980s movie Last Starfighter.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
Now, it was a great mechanic when it worked for my benefit. No.
Yes.
We know the models that have it. They're all there. It's bad. They've taken it away from some. They've given random movements to, like in the Infernal Dwarves, for instance. They have units with random movement, but they can only charge forward.
Correct.
So, as broken as that, I think, as broken as I feel that army is, that was a good rule they applied.
Absolutely.
But why only apply to that one army? The problem is, like you've talked about, the Death Zone. There's a steam tank over there, and it can go 3d6. So nothing is safe within 10 inches of that
Exactly.
on anything. And it's the only, and there's no real reason for that either. And it's the only type of movements, those units are the special units that break every rule where they can charge in any
They can
direction.
charge in any direction. Basically, don't bring
Right.
your skirmishers, don't bring your MSU units.
Yeah.
I'm going to kill them.
Yeah.
You get close. And if I've got something that can do that,
Yeah. I mean, the Orcs and Goblins still have the pump wagons. I don't mind them having the random movement for distance.
correct.
I just don't like that
Right, I'm the same. Especially when you get
Anywhere
into the
around
3d6 when it can be a decent distance.
because
you know.
it breaks the whole formation and it breaks the whole
Right.
getting to someone's flanks. It breaks that whole thing.
Exactly.
And then, of course, like I said, I mentioned the steel tank. Excuse me. I
Yes.
mentioned the tank, but I mean, the bigger the model is that has this,
And that's what
like,
it's about, like-
again, the pump
the-
wagon's a tiny little thing that it's not going to crush stuff. It's going to blow out chaff, but it's not going to do a major thing. But then you move up to the tank, or you move up the Vermin Swarm's Abomination.
Yes.
And now you've got a monster that's doing 3d6 strength 6 attacks with a zone of death around it.
Zone of death.
Yeah, so anyway, random movement, in my opinion, needs to go as far as charging.
Yes.
Charge forward,
You should
keep
still-
the same
You
mechanic
have to
where
see
you,
what you're charging
yeah,
into.
you can keep the same mechanic where they can't stand and shoot, they can't respond to it as a special thing. I'm not a big fan of either one of those, but as a special thing for that type of movement, I'm okay with it. Because it's got the disadvantage, because the random movement is a disadvantage because you can't rely on it moving.
Can't line of movement, and your charge is never going to be as long as a ranked unit with standard charge rules,
Correct. So I don't mind it having those other little
on average.
yes,
Yeah.
those little bonuses.
Right.
But the fact that you can go in any again, it's just ridiculous. Anyway, just kind of my rant on that one.
Yes. Yes.
That's one I think really need. This is one of my big ones that just needs
Yeah.
to go.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Next is allow all visible charges. Now, what this kind of is right now, you determine what aspect your target is in. Are you in the front, flank, or rear? It is not uncommon that your unit can physically see the frontage of a unit. In other words, it's front, it's flank, or it's rear.
right.
But because of your position, even though you have the movement, you can't actually contact
Yep.
the aspect that you're facing. So it's not a legal charge.
Correct.
So I can see the front of this unit, but because I'm slightly outside of 45, I can't charge
Can't
it
charge me
because
my side is blocked by a
the
building.
side is blocked by another unit or a
Impassable
building,
terrain.
impassable terrain, whatever it is. So that's one I think that, I don't think it's necessary in the game.
Right.
I think, yes, if you have a charge towards a flank of a unit or a front, and that's which quarter you're in, you need to charge that. However, if you can't charge that, you should have the option of charging the quarter that you can actually
you can
see.
see. Correct.
leaving all the other rules regarding charging and contacts and pivots and closing the door in place so people don't do funky stuff.
Right.
But at
But
least
if you can see the unit, why can't you charge?
exactly.
I mean, this. If
Especially you're facing the unit, and you can see it, but you just happen to be off by an inch.
They're not facing you is the problem.
Exactly.
It's like because this just came up in a game that the battle report will be up in a couple days on, and where a Equitane player had a unit of Grail Knights into my flank, so I had a unit of orcs, and I just backed them up so the front of them was an inch behind a building. So he was to my flank, but he could not see anything in my flank. He could see my entire front rank.
Yep.
So, but he couldn't charge me because he was in my flank.
Exactly.
I don't like this rule at all.
No, neither do I.
So, that's that. And then unit spacing.
Unit spacing. Right now you have the rule that you have to be an inch away from one another when you're normally setting up. That's kind of put aside when you're charging. You can get close. You can get within a half inch.
Right.
It's like
When you're moving.
when you're moving. It's like I don't understand the point of the half. It's a complication I don't think is necessary.
Correct.
You just can't touch another unit. That's all you need to do.
Yes.
I don't want to have to argue and measure half inches with people.
Right. Right.
No base in the game is a half inch, so it's not a big deal. It's just it's a minor quibbly thing
It's
that
a quibbly
I see
thing
people run into.
for new people that just a weird concept for them
Exactly.
to grasp.
Exactly.
You mean when I'm wheeling out from here, I can't get within a half inch of this guy, but if I'm sitting there, I just need to be an inch away. Now I have to be a half inch away. Now I'm in combat, so now I can be right up against the guy if I need to. It's just
So I think the basic rule is normally you're an inch away, and all other circumstances you can't come into contact unless you're charging into contact.
Right.
And that it would just make it easier, I think, for newer players and in general, especially when you see with somebody with lots of units, they start stacking, and
yes,
most of us just let them get it. Oh, it's okay. Your guys are all too close. You don't want to bother, but you shouldn't have to have that discussion.
All right. So, shooting.
Schießen. Yes, shooting.
This is what do we got? Shooting. Artillery versus archery.
Yeah.
My 90-point splatterer, rock lobber, rock thrower, stone thrower, whatever you want to call it, seems to do a lot more damage than 90 points worth of archers.
As does a elven bolt thrower do more damage than
Equivalent points. Yes.
or a hellblaster during the equivalence of guys with handguns.
I'm not real sure where artillery became so cheap compared to regular shooting guys. Anyway,
Well, I think this was a problem even in the Warhammer days to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge, I think, is what I think got lost, and we'll talk about archery, is archery effectiveness is not the same as it was when it was first developed back in Warhammer for the points that were used. So now you have you've got more wounds on your archer unit, you argue.
Right.
Yeah, you've probably got 10 archers for the point of that war machine.
Correct.
You got 10 wounds as opposed to 3 or maybe 4 wounds. But you got toughness 3 or toughness 4 wounds, not toughness 7 wounds.
7, correct.
So, which compensates for a multitude of sins.
And the artillery usually has much longer range than the
Exactly.
other
Shoots
guys.
much farther. Then you say, and it tends to have higher strength and better modifiers.
And it shoots over troops better
Exactly.
in a lot of cases.
Then you say, oh, well, in close combat, those archers are better. Well, not really. Let's be honest.
They are technically better.
They are better, but they're not going to beat anybody.
They're not beating anybody.
With a few exceptions, of course. But
they can fight off little groups of chaff,
Right.
which sometimes war machines can.
Exactly. And this is really about, I think, and we'll talk about it when we talk about points. It's about the points. We're not saying that archery and artillery have to be radically changed. That's not the
Right.
issue. It's just one seems to be for the points substantially better than the other.
Correct. It is. And that brings us to archery effectiveness.
Right.
And this is kind of what you kind of hinted on before, and it's
And just for clear, when we say archery, we mean ballistic-based skill-based shooting.
Yeah. Not just bows.
Right.
Crossbows, guns, everything. And this is the point. A lot of their archer effectiveness went away when things started charging further.
Exactly.
It used to be you had your set charge range was your movement times 2.
Exactly.
Now your movement
Plus 2d6 or plus.
So on average,
2d6
your
with the
movement
next one rolled.
Your movement 4 troops would charge
8
would
inches.
charge 8 inches. Well, was set at 8
they
inches
set 8
before.
inches.
Now on average they're charging 11
Correct.
on average, and the potential to get all the way out to 16.
Right.
Which means you're definitely, at least one turn
I mean,
closer to
in
your
old version of
enemy.
Warhammer, it was turn 3 or turn 4 before you even had a chance to charge.
Right.
If you're talking about infantry, if the guy sat back,
Right.
the now usually you can get a charge off turn 2 with no no problem.
Right.
That's a lot less shooting than you could do when early editions of Warhammer. 8th had the same problem. 9th, which is a different game, of course, but still has a similar issue.
Right.
If you can't keep your archers away, which if they're in the battle line you can't, they're not going to get too many chances to shoot.
Correct.
And that's a big difference. And then the charge distance, things like there was the old rule that if you're within your basic move, you couldn't
Too close to shoot at.
too close
stand
to
and
shoot at. Made sense because people were taking 3 or 4 turns to close in on somebody.
Correct. You've
Now that
already
you
taken
can
use
get
all
so
the way
you're
in.
already taking the you're getting there so close. That's kind of a rule that doesn't need to be there any longer, frankly.
It does not.
And it helps archers be archers and helps ballistic skill troops a little bit because they should be able to defend themselves by stopping things, charging them to a certain degree.
Right. Yeah, and standing and shooting has never been that effective.
No,
as it
half
is.
the time if you got average troops, you're rolling 6s. It's like it's just an excuse to roll some dice and maybe get a hit through, and you're probably only a strength 3, 4 anyway. And chances of you doing anything, even if you do hit, is pretty small,
Right.
unless you have a massive amount of
Right.
fire. So, which brings us to the modifiers. Once again, when troops were moving much slower across the table, you didn't have to worry about it. You had a lot more time to pummel them. You could take some of the modifiers.
Right.
When walking into woods could lose you a game
Yeah, because you were never coming out.
because you were never coming out. Terrain would funnel people.
Yes.
That would keep people out of terrain. So that would
that modifier
modifier
never-
didn't become as important.
Correct.
How you would shoot through or above units and things of that nature. So the modifiers weren't quite used as much, and even though they were used, you still had a lot more chances to shoot. That's all gone now. So I mean, to me, the simple thing is just get rid of a couple of the modifiers. I mean, a lot of games that you see with basic archery, they usually only have 1 or 2 modifiers because it's usually not super effective at getting rid of guys, especially archers that all they can do is shoot, and when they get in the fight, they're going to lose against almost anything. So.
Yes.
And you really don't need, in my opinion, the stand and shoot modifier doesn't need to be there any longer. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that's one that could go away
It can
quickly.
go away. For bows, I don't understand why they don't have them. Just the no modifier for what do you call it? Fast shit.
Movement shit, quick to fire.
Quick to fire.
Right.
There's no reason for all bows not just to have that. They're strength 3 shots
Right.
for most people. They're going to do some stuff, but that's what they need to be able to do
Right.
is play that game. You can
Yeah.
only, unless you're skirmishers, you can only back up so quick. So
Yes.
so I think just getting rid of those types of modifiers would help a lot. And even some of the cover modifiers, to think about how they work.
Right. Yeah. So I agree. If you bring down a few modifiers, effectiveness goes way up,
Exactly.
and now ballistic skill shooting becomes
And
more
then,
of a
and
thing
then you'll
again.
see some goblins, some orc archers on the table. You'll see
You'll see mine out there just losing and dying.
exactly. Yes, you'll see human archers on the table. You don't tend to see those types of guys. Just because
Correct.
they just can't do much.
Yeah.
Unless they are a skirmisher and you can hide a wizard in them.
Correct.
And that shouldn't be the reason you take a skirmisher.
And they're
archer
skirmishers,
unit.
and even human skirmishers can move 8 inches and get out of the way and still shoot.
Exactly.
Still be fairly effective. Or
Yeah.
They don't lose their effectiveness because they're generally quick to fire or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. So, anyway, that's our shooting.
Yes.
Which brings us to close combat.
Close combat.
Uh,
Stop touching me.
Close combat's going to start with the bane of a lot of people's existence, the parry rule.
Parry?
Parry rule.
Not the Perry brothers.
No,
the
not
Perry
the Perry
rule.
brothers. There's an A, not an E.
Yes.
I don't know how to start on this one.
Don't mince words. Tell me what
It's
you
too
think.
good for what it is. It's too good, and it's too good. The worse you are, the more benefit you get
Exactly.
from this. So my goblins, on my goblin troops, parry is something I really want. I want them to have hand weapon shield
Absolutely.
because they're crap.
Because your weapon skill too.
So I'm weapon skill 2 guys, and I use my shield and sword better than that weapon skill 6 elf.
Exactly.
Anyway.
I mean, you're basically saying, oh, elf or warrior of dark gods, you paid all those points for that extra weapon skill.
Yeah.
I've just nullified it with my 3-point guy.
Yeah. Yeah. It's way too good for what it was. Parry in the past has been different things, and in different game systems it's been different things. And it's also simplify it. An extra pip on the armor, an extra, even a 6-up ward save. I don't like that. I mean, I think that's effective, but I don't like that mechanic because it's another die roll.
As a die roll.
I would rather it just be the armor. And then by being the armor, it also takes away that unrealistic thing you get with the knights charging in you with their big lances, blah blah blah. And I'm going to throw up my shield.
Yes.
And
somehow I've absorbed all your lances.
Correct. Giving it +1 armor,
because
it
you can't
means
maneuver
it's not
around
really
those,
going to be effective.
and the shock
No.
of impact has no
Yeah.
impact.
But anyway,
Well, I
the
mean,
strength will go right through it if it's an armor buff.
especially some of most of the shields are nothing but little pieces of balsa wood.
Correct.
But there's all kinds of, to me, this is one of the few things that's in Ninth Age. It's just, to me, is a badly contrived rule. It's imbalancing in a way that it makes cheap guys, have an ability that they shouldn't have. They're not paying points for.
Right.
Now, if you want to make those guys real expensive to compensate, that's a different story. But and I think we have to be clear. It's really it's just the parry rule in regards to the hand weapon
Hand weapon shield.
and shield. But there's all kinds of ways, as Waldorf says. You can go back to adding +1 the armor save. You can bring back the ward save. You can look at what was shields really used for. Is it a melee weapon or is it an anti-missile weapon? You can
Right.
give a +1 armor save, but only to melee, or a +1 armor save only to ballistic or only to shooting.
Right.
There's any number of things you can do with that.
Yeah. Other than what it is.
Exactly.
It's what it is.
But the reducing, elite guys, all of a sudden they can only hit you on 4s, which
Right.
they're paying, a premium to hit you, and they can't.
Now, don't get me wrong. I know when this rule first came out in Ninth Age, it was -1 to be hit regardless.
Yes.
And that had
was-
a different effect in that the highly skilled guys became impossible to hit
Correct.
for lower skilled guys.
Absolutely.
Now, if you want to combine that, leave parry like it is, and give that back to all troops, and combine that with bringing down the size of rare troops to 10 or whatever, then fine. These are great guys. They should be able to block you, and you hard as hell to hit
But
them.
then the hand weapon shield option should be commensurately point. It shouldn't be 1 point or 0
Correct.
points or your base point. It should have a
It should have
points
a point
magnifier
value.
because
Correct.
it's having a big impact.
Right.
Yeah.
And like I said, in a way, I kind of liked the parry rule when it first came out with this edition. I kind of liked it because you've got an elite unit. They go hand weapon and shield. They reduce their damage output, but they're tanks.
Yes.
They're so good. They're not getting hit,
Well, it's a good thing,
and
particularly
I'm okay with that if it's a small unit size.
being one of my primary areas being elves. I like the idea of elves being harder to hit.
Right.
When they are hit, they die.
Correct.
But being harder to hit instead of other mechanics. So
Yep.
I didn't actually have a problem with it either, but I didn't think it was pointed correctly. I don't
Right.
mind if things are only hit on 5s, but you better be
Well-
paying some points for that ability.
Yeah, and a unit of 40 guys with needing 5s to be hit.
Yeah.
is
That's insane.
ridiculous. Yes.
Now, unit of 10, 15,
Yeah.
maybe 20, but
Back to what we talked about again. The rares being 10, or I mean special maybe 20.
Exactly.
Anyway, whatever that number is.
Exactly.
Anyway, that's parry.
And then hordes, and we'll kind of cover some of this already. And really, in close combat, the issue with hordes is the idea that you get an extra rank of fighting just because you're in a
wider.
specific, because you're wider, which is the craziest thing.
Yeah.
The
It's kind of counterintuitive.
Exactly. So if you could lap around or something, I suppose. But to me, that's just a modifier that needs to go away. You can't fight in that. You don't get to fight an extra rank just because you're in that formation.
Yeah.
If a particular unit has it, great. I don't have a problem. Then it can be in whatever formation it wants to be and get that rule. It doesn't have to be 10
Fight
wide.
an extra rank rule.
Or 6 wide, depending on what it is.
Just detach it from hordes. And
exactly. It's something GW did to, in my opinion, to sell more models, to make you have bigger units. And yeah, they look cool on the table, but it just doesn't. I don't think it holds up anymore.
I agree. Next thing.
Determining the winner. This is a minor quibble, and it's the whole back to how steadfast kind of works in the game. So you charge into a unit, you cause 3 more casualties than they caused on you, but because they have 3 ranks and they have that combat res, they win the combat.
Mm-hmm.
This is something else that you saw in 8th. To me, I don't think that's a needed mechanic. It's like you can. You took more loss. You took more casualties. You lost the combat. Now doesn't mean you should be running away from losing the combat.
Correct.
But you shouldn't just automatically. The combat res is because I have more ranks. Determining winners and losers to me is an odd mechanic. It should impact the role for sticking around, not determining if you won
Who
or
won
lost.
the combat or not.
Because then you get in these weird things about what has ranks and what doesn't have ranks for determining,
Yes.
and you have some oddities with, a monster has a rank and, fast cav don't have a rank, but even though they can do a lot of damage, So,
yeah, I see this. And then you apply the ranks in your banner to your break check.
exactly.
You lose, he did 5 wounds, I did 1, I lost combat. I roll a break test. My leadership's 7. Do I stick or not? And apply my combat res
Right,
to that.
you just add it. I got 3 extra ranks. I'm gonna add +3. I'm not going anywhere.
Right.
I'm a 10.
Yep.
So
Yeah. Yeah. So.
And then you still have the steadfast effect.
Correct.
But you don't have the effect. Oh, I lost my frenzy because I lost, even though I killed more guys than you than you killed than me.
Right.
Yeah,
I'm not happy about you butchering half my friends, but
right.
There's still a lot of us left, guys.
Exactly.
And that brings us to weapons.
And I think that's even important in line with what we talked about if we did those like standard types of formations and things,
Yes.
where you don't have the thing that's 10 ranks deep by 5 wide.
Right.
Or the stubborn unit that's 1 wide and 20 deep.
1 wide and
or
20
3
deep.
wide and 20 deep, whatever.
Yeah, okay. It's your conga line thing.
Yes.
And what was it? Weapons. Close combat.
Yeah.
What did you have on this one?
Well, this one is basically what we talked about is Ninth Age has put the team has put a lot of work in to try to make all the different weapons options in close combat
different.
and shooting different and worth taking.
Correct.
They were, if you played 8th, clearly some weapons for the points were better than other weapons
Yes.
by a long shot. You just didn't
Flails
see.
were incredible.
Right, you just didn't see certain weapons, right? And I think Ninth Age has corrected that to a degree, but there probably needs to be a little bit more work. And some of the bonuses are problematic in other ways. So we kind of talked about the parry roll already. That's really the hand weapon and shield.
Mm-hmm.
So as a rule that you can only be hit on 4s it's just not a good rule, and it causes other challenges.
Yes.
But then we have halberds are kind of the same as they were in 8. You get a +1 strength. You can't use a shield. So, but you get a strength at your initiative.
Straight off. That's
It's straight
fine.
off. It does what it does. It's pretty straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have a thing like
the flail, where you get the +2 strength, but you're giving the opponent +1
+1
to
to
hit.
hit. So then you have to think about that with a
Yeah.
lot of guys. You don't want small elite units to have flails. So that's an interesting one. But then you have like a lance. Lance gives you a +2 on the charge.
+2 strength on the charge.
Plus 2 strength on charge, but you only get it in the first round of combat. And when we talk about points, we can talk about the challenges there too. That's great on the charge, but you don't get to charge off quite often with cavalry, which has something to have a lance. usually kind of screwed, with a few exceptions.
Yeah, because now you're down to your strength 3
and
guy.
with charges the way they are in Ninth Age, where you can't guarantee you're going to close, and the difference not being that much, and long charges for infantry being very common attempts because doesn't hurt infantry that much.
Yes.
Oh, I didn't move. I moved between 1 and 6 inches instead of 4 inches. It's not not like cavalry who, give up a lot if they fail.
Correct.
So, that lance doesn't do anything else, and a lot of the cavalry tends to be human cavalry. I mean, you have some elven cavalry, of course, but chaos was there. But it doesn't do anything. It doesn't help you strike first. It doesn't help you do anything else. It just gives you that +1, and only on the that first turn.
Yeah.
So.
Having a second weapon makes you faster, brings up your initiative. The paired weapons brings up your initiative. But having a 12-foot long lance doesn't let you strike first.
You need to do something with it. Even if there's any number of things you can do. You can raise initiative, but that's dangerous only because then it makes elves crazy.
Oh, they're already crazy.
Well, crazier.
Yes.
You can do things like say, well, when you have a lance, you get devastating charge, so you get an extra attack. That's scary.
Yes.
Or you can say, lance attacks get to re-roll their misses, so you don't have the rubber lance rule.
Right.
So there's any number of things you can do to help the lance a little bit. And I think cavalry, and we'll get to cavalry, has a lot of challenges in ninth, and doing some things with the lance would help cavalry to a certain degree.
Overall.
Yeah. Which then brings us to the one you just raised, which is the double hand weapon.
Double hand weapon.
And you get a +1 initiative. Doesn't sound like much.
It is.
But it is ridiculous.
It is.
All of a sudden you've got you have low initiative guys, like ogres, for example.
Yes.
That are
orcs.
Throw
all of a sudden, in that pile as
it's supposed to be their disadvantage, and they're going at the same time than a lot of human guys. So, I can't really afford to tackle those ogres because I'm going to have so many attacks hitting me simultaneously.
And it's really bad. What I've seen really bad in the paired weapons is who it's available to and what it does to them. For instance, I played last night. I played a Undying Dynasties guy who had his Shabti with paired weapons. Now these guys are fast.
Or the ogre mercenaries with paired weapons.
I mean, these guys are incredibly fast now.
With high strength.
And high strength, multiple wounds. I mean, the disadvantage to these units used to be that they would have to soak up the damage from being hit and then hit back.
Hard.
Really hard, and hammer you for it. But now, with their initiative bumps...
They're often hitting the same or even faster than you.
Than a lot of other troops. Mm-hmm. I mean, that, of course, they're not good. That doesn't apply to elves, of course, because elves are still going way before any of them. But for standard troops, or even if it's the same speed, it's just not what it was. And I think the paired weapon +1 initiative is a little much.
It's much. It's too much. And it kind of needs to go because once again, it covers up the weaknesses in a lot of guys, and it makes guys that are already fast even faster.
And now that we've talked about two things in this weapon section that cause problems, parry and additional hand weapon giving you additional initiative. Who was it that thought it was a good idea to give that rule to the Iron Fist and the ogres? Let's give them a weapon that gives them both parry. You can be -1 to hit.
3 things, right?
I get initiative, I get an armor, I get additional attack, and...
I think we should add leadership to it. That way we can cover everything.
Why
every
not?
Weaknesses of those guys. Yeah.
Why not? At this point, why not? Anyway. Didn't want to go off on specifics on units, but anyway, that Iron Fist is ridiculous.
That's the example of when things go a little too far.
Yes.
But then that brings us to spears. So they've made spears. Spears, you never saw them in
no, they were the
7th.
trash.
They were the trash ones. There was no point in taking them.
They had the fight in extra ranks, but it gave you 5 extra strength 3 attacks. Who cared?
Which didn't really matter.
Right.
The compared to the strength or the extra, you could get the extra attacks with the extra hand weapon and
Right.
But now, so they have armor piercing and lethal strike, fight in extra rank.
Yep.
On every round of combat.
Correct. Even when they charge, when that...
Right, and they tend to be a free upgrade. Halberd tends to cost a point more in a lot of guys, sometimes 2.
Right.
for a +1 strength, it can't use a shield. Now I've got a weapon that I get to use my shield. I get a whole other rank fighting, so I'm probably compensating for the lack of strength. I get armor piercing anyway, so I have the same effect on armor. And if you got cavalry or monstrous cavalry or whatever, you're not going to have any armor chance over the 6. They'll have a lot of attacks, and spearmen tend to be bigger units, so that tends to be you're going to get a few of those through, and it makes it really scary for for a lot of things.
Yeah, it does.
So I think that the spears are, to me, the spears are like the choice to take for a weapon, unless you have low weapon skill guys.
Yeah, unless where it goes to the hand weapon shield.
Yeah, unless you have the lightning reflexes rule.
Right.
So
correct.
That changes the dynamics a little bit.
They're just so good because the armor piercing is good against anybody.
Exactly.
And 5 additional attacks again. Depending on who's carrying them now, because now you see what used to be elite troops carrying spears.
Exactly.
So
and once again, and if they're being charged by something, okay, but they're getting it on the charge.
Right.
So
lethal strike on the charge. Okay, I'm all right with that. When they're being charged.
When they're being charged,
Yes.
But they're getting it on the charge.
The round.
It's already funky enough that infantry's charging cavalry. That's a game.
Yes.
We allow that. We have to. But the idea that they're getting a bonus about fighting. Not only are they already cavalry at a disadvantage because they've lose their weapons option, now they're getting attacked by these guys who have, super seeking weapons.
Correct.
Yeah.
Can't ignore their armor.
Yeah.
Not just when they're hurling forward at them, but just
Exactly.
poking them later on.
Exactly. So I mean, that's when I don't mind that they gave them the
Armor piercing.
AP1 to
Right.
make it a little better. I don't mind that they gave them the lethal strike, but to me, that lethal strike should only be on the turn that they're
The
charged.
turn that they are charged.
Yes.
Correct.
And after that, they just have AP1.
Yeah.
And then they got to deal with their life after that. Yeah.
AP1 is still good.
It
Still
is.
would probably be a weapon of choice for me.
It depends. I mean, it's harder when you face, there is a challenge with one-up cavalry.
One-up
doesn't-
armor cavalry. Yeah, AP1 doesn't do
doesn't
anything
help
to
you,
it.
which is another problem,
If
another
you're
issue.
strength 3 guys.
Yeah. But which you have to compensate for. But even there, get rid of the AP1 and give them lethal strike. You can do it the other way around if you want to still make them scary. Just something so they're not quite as
Yeah.
scary.
But the downside, of course, is
And they shouldn't be better against infantry.
Correct.
Historically, the spear was the weapon. The reason that people use them wasn't to fight against cavalry. It's because it was the cheapest weapon to outfit troops with, because metal was expensive to get people
Just,
swords.
So knock out a spearhead, stick it on
Exactly,
the end of a stick,
and
and
frankly,
you're
it was much easier to train people to have a sword. Now you had elite, like hoplites and such that knew how to use their spears and all, but but still, and whole shield wall tactics and all of that. But yeah, I think that this made the spear a little too good compared to some of the other choices, and even then, it wouldn't. It just goes to the challenges with cavalry, which we'll get to. If you want to keep the spear the way it is, and I think you have to make a few little tweaks to some of the other weapons, and there has to be some other changes on cavalry.
Yep, I agree. And that's going to bring us to units,
Units.
where we have cavalry.
Yes. Cavalry. What is it good for?
Cav, more than any other unit, any other thing in this game is taking a hit in 9th Age.
Yes.
I mean, the parry rule hurts them because your knights, which your
Need to
cav
hit.
units, which need to hit, now are a lot of times getting the -1 to hit their guys.
They're usually hitting only in force. So
And
they're
then-
missing half of their guys. They don't tend to have a lot of attacks anyway.
Yeah, and then the bonus, what we just talked about, the spears, of course, much better. Ideal against cav now.
Ideal against cavalry.
As a matter of fact, cav units will shy away, won't go near a spear unit anymore.
Exactly.
And then the general price decrease on infantry,
Yes.
and seemingly price increase on cav, or roughly stayed the same, or
I guess it's comparative. The cheaper infantry is a little cheaper.
Right.
I mean, you can get 5 infantry guys for 1 cavalry in some cases,
Yeah.
on an extreme,
you can.
The,
Actually, a lot more than that on extreme. I mean, a 3-point goblin and a 28-point cav.
Yeah.
That's more like 7 guys.
Yeah.
8.
And that's that makes it a challenge. And they're so dependent on we're talking about. They're so dependent on the charge to do their damage. In a game that's built on grinding, let's be honest.
This game is
built on grinding and
Right.
outmaneuvering your opponent and setting up your combo charges and and that's the fun in the game. It's not just putting two guys in front of each other and rolling dice.
Correct.
I mean, you can do that, but you're not going to win a lot of games. It's really about knowing how to, plan your matchups and get your multi charges in and everything else, outmaneuver, and that's what's so wonderful about this game.
Correct.
So the challenge with Cavalry is, yes, it's faster than infantry,
It is.
and but it doesn't charge that much farther in reality.
It usually has a 5-inch
Yes.
plus another 2.
Right.
But it's there.
It's there. It charges a little farther, but it's not something you can rely on. And chances are, if you've missed that charge,
You're getting charged.
you're probably going to be charged if the things are in front of you.
Right.
And you say, oh, you can put them on the flank, you can maneuver. If the guy's going to let you do that, yeah, that's great. But there's other ways to keep Cav from doing that. You can block them up with chaff. You can angle your own guy so that doesn't happen. You can have a type of army that covers a good amount of the table. You can castle. I mean, there's all sorts of ways you can deal with people getting on your flank. You can have ambushers that get behind the cavalry.
Yes.
So there's counters to that, and they don't
Big random movement monsters.
Yes, and flying monsters. And the most Cav, except for maybe King of Equitaine, doesn't have a lot of static combat res on top of that.
Right.
So, there's ways to get around it. So, the thing is with Cavalry is right now, I saw something on the board that said, equal units points of Cavalry shouldn't beat an equal pointed unit of infantry, which I totally agree with. You should be paying a premium for better armor save,
And
which
the
Cavalry tends
movement.
to have, and the movement benefit. Absolutely,
Right.
In Swift Stride, you have to pay a premium, but 2 or 3 times as many points of Cavalry should be able to beat,
Yes.
an infantry unit or a monstrous infantry, which is even worse for cavalry.
Yes.
Now, I'm not saying they're going to chase them off the table, but at least they should be able to fight for a while. And that comes to be that. Most cavalry can't grind because they don't tend to have high strength attacks. I mean, some does, but most doesn't. Doesn't have high strength attacks. They have very few attacks usually because the cost per model, you tend to have relatively small units, comparative to the infantry.
And the other thing is you're doing that Cav does 5-6 wounds to a unit. That's not reducing its combat effectiveness at all in most cases.
Because it's got the ranks to absorb it.
And every single wound you take with Cav
You're gonna be
is
losing an
reducing
attack.
your combat effectiveness.
Exactly. So, that's one of the, and that, whereas I think they've addressed monstrous Cav to a degree, so it doesn't have quite the same armor as it did before. That's good. I think light Cav is fine. Even medium Cav is okay. Well, medium Cav's probably got some other challenges, but it's really the heavy Cav is that
It's the heavy Cav that really got
it doesn't
hurt.
do enough when it hits. And as I said, you don't want it to win automatically. You got to
Yeah, you don't want it to hit and just win. The old Bretonian 6th edition
exactly.
or whatever it was.
That's not fun. That's foolish. But you want to be able to do some damage when it if you're going to have it be a charge weapon, then it needs to do more on the charge as far as damage. If you don't want it to be an effective charge weapon, then it should have to do a better job in being able to maintain and grind a little bit better.
Yeah.
And there's 2 things that affect grinding. 3 things. One is, how many attacks you can get out and at a decent strength.
Right.
Most cavalry doesn't have that many attacks and that much strength after it charges.
Mm-hmm.
The other is how much protection you have. Cavalry usually has pretty good protection.
Pretty good protection.
But there's enough strength 5 and there's enough armor. There's a lot of armor piercing now. There's armor piercing everywhere now.
There is.
That all of a sudden, unless you have a 1-up save Cav, which is only Warriors of Dark Gods and
Empire
Sonstal, it's now getting a little bit risky. It's easier to lose that 25-point guy,
Yes.
to a lowly point goblin.
Yeah.
There's a few of them actually.
Exactly.
So
Those goblins have spears.
right.
God
so
forbid.
so something has to give. I mean, actually, if you look at Age of Sigmar, what they did is they just made all the cavalry have heavy cavalry has 2 wounds.
2 wounds. Okay.
And that's frankly something that probably makes sense. That horse is a heck of a lot bigger than any guy.
Yeah, or even higher toughness. Because
or higher toughness.
Like I said, that horse is a lot bigger than that
Exactly.
toughness 3 guy riding it.
Exactly. Make them toughness. Toughness 4. Maybe
Right.
limit the 1 armor a little bit more, but make it just so they can do that. there's different things, but I think something needs to happen with cavalry so it can just hang around a little bit.
Right.
The other one is you make them, steadfast, so they don't run away. They take the losses, but they don't run away. I'd rather not see that.
Right.
I wouldn't mind each army having one stubborn unit, but you don't want to see an army of that.
Yeah, I don't.
You
Even that's if it's one stubborn unit, not one stubborn unit type.
Correct. Yeah.
Though
And it has to be something that's not your main unit either. So, but really, I think you're either adjust protection or you adjust the way they fight. But something needs to give, or they need to be a heck of a lot cheaper than they are.
Right.
I mean, at the end of the day, you can do whatever you want as long as the points make sense. Right now, I
That's
don't think
true.
the points make sense for the general effectiveness.
No, they don't.
Now you can argue, a good player can take a cavalry army and beat an average player. Well, absolutely, a good player can take a snotling army, a grotling army. I'm sorry, and probably beat an average player. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about average players versus average players.
Right.
Or good players versus good players.
Yes.
What can they do?
And then we move on to simplifying the command groups. Here we're talking about, one of my things in this is I play orcs and goblins. Why am I paying 10 points for my orc champion and 10 points for my goblin champion? They are nowhere near each other.
When an ogre pays 10 points for his champion.
And an ogre pays 10 points for his champion.
Or man-eater pays 10 points.
Yeah. Or even a chaos warrior, or whatever you want to call it. A mounted knight.
Or a grail knight.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that leads us back to changing the point system on command groups. And then that gets finicky, blah, blah, blah. So why don't just build in the cost of every unit a command group?
Why does it have to be pointed separately? It's okay, lets people have more flexibility, but really do you need to have the flexibility if you have a musician or a standard?
Yeah.
Just let people, if the unit has access to it, just give it to them.
Yeah, build it in their standard cost.
And frankly, it looks good. I like seeing standards.
Yeah.
Standards quite often are what can really separate an army in a game. And you don't see them anymore because no one wants to put them in a small unit.
Right.
You only put them in the biggest units you have because you don't want to lose them because of the points, which we'll get to. But I like to see more standards in the game. Quite often I'll end up, we play the game. There's standards in my units, but I don't have any standards.
I don't have any standards. Yes.
Because it's a modeling. This is an aesthetic game. You want it to look good.
You want it to look good.
And they've done such a good job with giving these abilities. I love the abilities that they've given for the champions and the musicians and the standards. I love that.
No, they made them all worthwhile. They're good.
And there's some units that just can't take those.
But you're talking about
that's fine.
In a lot of cases, you're talking about a 60-point unit because it's a crap unit. A little unit of 20 goblins. 60-point unit that I'm paying 30 points for my command for that.
Right.
Which is,
okay,
anyway.
I get an extra attack.
And the advantage of this is I give you 50 points when you run over it with a fast cav unit.
Exactly. So it's really a tax. It's really an MSU tax.
Right.
You don't want to give small units command because of it.
Yeah, I think build it in the units. I mean, what are we really talking about? We're talking about it's a unit of guys. It's a unit of guys on a battlefield. In general, they're going to have a banner. They're going to have a leader for that little group.
And a musician.
Fine. Give it to them.
Yep.
Build it into the point cost. Be done with it.
Yes, and make it simple.
And it's simple. Everyone has them.
And you don't have to worry about that these guys cost more or less than those. And I need to find 10 points. I'm going to drop a standard in this unit and use these weird type of things,
Yeah, and then you have units that don't have certain things.
Correct.
And that's fine.
And we have plenty of those already. Most skirmishers don't have access to standards,
Correct.
And that's okay.
Yeah. So anyway, that's command groups. Simplify them, because again, it's not 10 points for a champion across the board does not make sense.
It doesn't.
Because it's nowhere near as effective, and again, it looks better.
It looks better. And so you'd have to, and as we'll talk about, you have to change the victory condition. You can't give, if you have more standards, you can't have 50 points every time you lose one of your standards.
Correct. You can either drop that down or you just eliminate it.
Or just get rid of it unless it's
one of the objectives.
Correct. You can identify, certain things, or it has to be, a minimum point size of a unit for the standard to count. There's any number of ways you can do it.
Yes. All right. Buffs and magic items.
Yes.
Allocate common magic items. There's way too many common magic items.
Oh yes.
And
Pages of them.
kind of the same thing we were talking about with champions. Giving an ogre who has 5 attacks a +2 strength weapon is a lot better than giving that same +2 strength weapon to a Empire captain, Sonnenstall captain, who has 3 attacks. They're both paying the same points for that. One's getting twice the usage out of it. And in general, it's too hard to price that based on what the guy has. We can't. It would be way too hard for them to have 4 or 5 different categories on each magic item. And not every army should have access to every item. So, again, 90% of the items, push them into the army books. Make them more flavorful that way. They're in every army book, not as a common item that's floating out there for anyone to take. And that eliminates the problem of the item being priced the same for no matter who takes it.
Yeah, I mean, basically, you have you can. Right now, they've made a good effort to separate, like on weapons, the points for a hero versus a lord.
Correct.
So that helps a little bit, but
It does.
frankly, an ogre hero and a goblin lord, it's
The ogre hero's paying less for it than the goblin lord, and he's getting a better benefit of it than the goblin lord.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this does make a lot of sense.
It gets even worse when you go to the Empire Sonnenstall, because some of their lords have 3 attacks.
Exactly.
So yeah.
So if you put it in the individual army, but one thing is you can just eliminate certain weapons from certain armies, or certain items that you think are going to cause a problem.
Correct.
Because that's the other challenge you have now, is there's so many, as we talk about buffs and things start stacking, it gets out of control.
Correct.
And when you have a concise number of things in your book that you have access to, it's easier to control it than trying to figure out all of the other things.
The random combinations
Right,
that can
that
happen.
people can come up, and because you
with
can
the
never figure it
spells,
all out.
items,
Yeah.
buffs.
The tournament players will figure it out eventually. You get the list on the net, but so you have that. So you can better point the units for the armies. Now you still have the challenge of goblin versus an orc shouldn't play the same, but you can have that argument. But it's not going to be 100%. Fixed, but it'd be a lot better.
It's going to be a lot closer.
You don't have to do weird things, like you don't have like the Beastbane Halberd. It's strength 5. Well, that's just so high strength guys don't take it, right?
Right.
And only low strength guys. They wouldn't have had to have done that if it was just limited to certain armies.
Yeah, they didn't want strength 7 guys getting a hold of that thing.
Right.
Anyway, so yeah, that makes perfect sense. Push them down the army books. They can be priced differently based on that. And quite frankly, you can have the same weapon in different army books
Exactly.
that have different point
If
values.
you want, you can call it something different, even.
Yes.
More
Something
flavorful.
more flavorful that fits
Yeah.
better. The next item on that list, of course, is
Banner
remove
discipline.
the banner discipline or change the banner
change
discipline to not affect the inspiring presence.
Well, this is
simple
funny.
fix.
This is basically the same as the standard of discipline that Warhammer 8th Edition had.
Yeah.
That was written in a certain way, and people didn't quite understand it, and a FAQ was written which completely screwed it up.
Correct.
Because the rule didn't say that it affected the generals and leadership impact. Right. But that's how it ended up being played because of that FAQ thing. And now 9th edition has the exact same unit. It has the same impact.
Right.
25 points to increase your entire army's leadership.
Only
by
my army
1.
within a 24-inch bubble.
Yeah, or
12 on each
36
side,
if I've
or
got it on
36
something
if
big.
big.
Is insane.
Yeah.
So what is the point of, once again, having points considerations for armies' leadership
values.
when I can always get to probably the max or close to the max leadership with no matter how crappy my leadership is.
Yeah, your elves are paying a premium for that leadership.
Exactly. And the Warriors of Dark Gods.
And I'll run dwarves and I'll run my orcs and stick the banner of discipline into a unit with my general, and now I've got the same leadership in this 24-inch bubble.
Exactly.
And which is where the primary fight
and
is
which
going
is
to happen
where
anyway.
most important things tend to happen with those armies.
So, yeah, it's either got to go or be fixed. It's just
Right.
And I'm one of the ones that benefit from it more than any because I've got low leadership armies. So, and I'm saying it needs to go. Or let it affect one unit. Fine.
I think as it originally was intended, I believe it was a 1 unit.
Yeah,
bonus.
we've talked about it before, and our belief it was intended
Yes.
to be for 1 unit because it was a 15-point item.
Exactly.
I mean, it was a dirt cheap item.
Right. And so clearly I think that was the intent and the problem, and just fix it, and that's fine. Give 1 unit, a +1 banner.
Right.
But then again, not as a same thing. Let certain armies have it, and maybe not other armies.
Right.
Clearly, elves don't, and dwarves don't need it.
Well, you can give it to the dwarves, and they won't use it.
Yeah. So why would you bother giving it to
putting
them?
in, yeah.
And maybe if you have an army that you want to have particularly fragile leadership,
You don't give it.
you don't give it to them either. So they do suffer from their leadership disadvantage.
Correct. And then we have multi-wound options. The weapon options. This is kind of proliferating throughout the game as well, and it's kind of bug. This is another one of my hot spots is all these weapons that are out. There's a lot of weapons out now that do multiple wounds.
Yes.
Which, again, the multiple wounds, we've talked about it before. If it's on a guy that has 1 or 2 attacks, it's not that big of a deal. It's there.
Even 3.
Not that huge of attack. You put it on an ogre, tyrant, or whatever who's got 5. All he's got to do is hit you once, get 1 through your armor, and you've got a decent chance of dying.
Yes.
Something needs to be done to balance them. Like, well, for instance, my big thing is the Kingdom of Aquitaine. They have the virtue that gives the guy ordnance attacks.
Right.
But he only gets it if he rolls a 6.
Right.
So it's limited. It's fine. I think that's okay. If you trade all your attacks for 1 with multi-wounds, or
half your
attacks, round down, whatever, for multi-wound attacks, okay. That's okay. But, this...
Well, I'm going to go back to the game that shall not be named. And if you actually look at a lot of their stat lines where they have multi-wound fighters versus single wound fighters, for turning it into our language, the multi-wound guys have less attacks, so they hit less, but they do more damage when they hit, and that's how they balance it there. You can do the same thing here, and frankly, probably humans need to have some capabilities because they just can't do it. They don't have the strength. They can't do the damage. It works for them, but you don't need it for ogrecons. You don't need it for vampires.
Yes, correct.
Guys that can put out a lot of strength attacks. In some armies, and I'm thinking Sylvanels, it's used because the rest of the army can't fight monsters. Well, we'll fix the army so you don't have to have this one guy that's running around. They have to be Superman, and then you have more hero hammer, So
correct. Back to the hero hammer thing.
And I said I don't mind elves having multi wounds, but not a guy with 5 and 6 attacks. So
And this kind of goes along the same, with fighting monsters. Some armies have to have something to deal with the monsters, what they don't have already. But again, putting it out as a general item that's available to anybody, or kind of paying a little bit more attention who has these items. Right.
And a lot of units have it now, and more units have it, and they tend to be limited only against certain troop types, which is fine.
Which again it's got it has a limit on it.
It makes it so you have a counter.
Correct.
So, and I think that works. But something needs to be done because I think there's a little bit too much of it, and there's too much of it at the higher strength, higher attack levels.
Which we talked about when we first started is the encouraging the hero hammer thing.
Exactly. I said, I don't mind if you can. I said, if my Empire Sun Install guy can have it, so he can fight that Warrior of the Dark Gods Lord, just because he doesn't have as many attacks, and they're not as strong. But at least when he does get through, he can do something.
He's not as tough,
so he has a chance.
Yeah, he's down in every other category.
But then that chance should make the points about the same too. If I can kill you, I should be able to. My point shouldn't be that far.
Yes.
If I can kill you in one round, particularly, my point should not be that far from yours.
Correct.
Even if you're an Uber guy.
What do we got next? Too many unit buffs? And they stack.
It's really about stacking buffs.
The stacking buffs. The
Because you
single
see,
buffs.
so many armies now have unit buffs. I mean, Magic was always a buff.
Correct.
There's always plenty of buffs and hexes in Magic, which affects Magic. But with Magic, one, you don't know if you're going to get it off. One, you don't know if you're going to get your spell, which we're going to get to.
Right.
Two, you don't know if you're going to roll well enough. Even if you do roll enough, you don't know if you're going to blow yourself up. If you manage to get past that, you get your spell off, you don't know if your opponent's going to dispel it.
Your opponent can say, "This is too terrible. I'm not going to let this happen."
Exactly. Either using a scroll or he's going to just beat you with the die roll. So you have to get through all those filters to get that effect
Right.
off. So the chances of you having lots of them, unless you get really lucky in a Magic phase, is you're probably going to get one on a unit most of the time. Sometimes you might get
Right, one or two.
one or two, but they're usually not going to be. They're usually going to be helpful, not really good.
Right.
You know. Now, when you have buffs that all I have to do is
Well,
find.
there's a debuff.
Yes, that's a debuff, the low battery buff we have to fix. All
There
we have to
we go.
do is get more power to the battery.
There we go.
Yeah.
Divert more
Exactly.
power to batteries.
Yes,
sir.
yes. We didn't have enough buffs on the computer here. Yeah, we had too many hexes. the when you get these automatic buffs,
Right.
there's nothing your opponent can do to stop that buff.
Right.
And okay, I put that buff on some goblins. Oh, I raise their initiative, or they reroll ones. Oh, big deal. I do that to some sword masters.
Right.
No, this is a whole different, or some ogre mercenaries.
Or some heavy cav re-rolling to wounds.
Yes,
It's like, oh, what the hell is that?
now it's a whole nother magnitude.
Right.
And so you have to be, and it's one thing to have one of those, but then when you can start buying like multiple buff wagons,
Right.
an EOS, and just stack them behind your guys, all of a sudden your cheap guys, these big 40, 50 blocks, are now rather elite just because they have so many rerolls on everything and so many
Correct.
protections. And you're not really paying a premium. You're paying points for it, but it's not really commensurate with the combat
Right.
thing that you're getting.
Yeah, the buff wagons in particular.
And then you stack, or you have the totems with the beast herds.
beast
you know,
herds, and,
where you
and-
can
and
stack
that
again.
and that kind of stacks with their already leadership roll to re-roll attacks.
Exactly.
Re-roll to
Once
failed
and they have the
hits.
buffs. Yeah, they get basically have free hatred every turn for no real
Correct.
negative. The only army that gets that. The
Yeah,
so-
and the buff characters as well. I mean, they go
Exactly.
into a unit, and all of a sudden now your unit has hatred.
and like I said, I'm a big Kingdom of Equity involved, and everyone talks about we need to have somebody to buff the lances, and it's like, yeah, to compete you need to. But it's like, but is that really the right answer? Do we have to have more guys buffing?
Right.
Or is it maybe the answer needs to be we need to have less types of buffs, or buffs need to be easier to deal with, or there have to be not an automatic thing. Maybe you have to pass a unmodified leadership check to get your buff. That's something
Right.
actually that once again Warthrone does. You have an ability, and you have to actually pass leadership checks to
use your
to
ability.
use that
Okay.
ability, and
Right.
you can't use the you can't have the general and the rerolling the standard bears,
Right.
which is another buff.
It's
in the
another
game.
buff. It is.
Basically, your leadership of your troops, unless you're outside the bubble, doesn't really matter. All that matters is what
Correct.
your general is, unless you can get that guy killed. And then re-rolling every possible leadership check with your battle standard bearer.
Yeah.
That's about. You just don't fail that many leadership checks.
Correct.
So if your guys aren't really unresilient because they get other ways of getting buffs, then they shouldn't really be getting the cost benefit of not having good leadership. Vermin Swarm come to mind on that also. So yeah.
Yes.
So I think there's just too many armies now have too many, and it's like a war. Everybody wants to have more of them, and maybe
Yeah,
there
I
needs to
mean,
be less and less stacking. Maybe you can't, with some. Maybe you have these things, but you can only apply, instead of applying to all units within 12 inches, you can pick one unit within 12 inches.
One unit within 12.
Maybe you can only affect a unit with a single buff. You can't stack buffs on a particular unit. You
Yeah.
got two buffs, somebody else has got to get that other one.
Correct.
So-
Yeah. I mean, that would help a ton.
Right, because it's hard in a D6 game. One pip is a big deal in a D6 game, even though you have a lot of filters with extra die rolls.
Right.
It really is a big deal, and the earlier that pip hits you, the more important that it is.
Correct.
So if you're affecting hitting, that's bigger than affecting wounding. Wounding's better affecting armor saves.
Yes.
Armor saves better affecting ward saves because they all go down the.
Because it goes down the list.
Right.
Correct.
and that's percentages go. So this is something that I hope, as I look at the army books, they start pulling back. I know everybody loves all this stuff, and and when I build my army, I love it too. Oh, this is so cool! I can do this, but maybe this is a little too many.
And this is kind of one of the things I've seen they've put out. They just recently put out the surveys against the armies. Right. What do we think about this army? What's this army's buffs, strengths, and weaknesses? Because one of the things I did notice that, and I mean it's understandable, army seems to be covering their weaknesses. Their traditional weaknesses seems to be starting to be covered. Because you've got these people working on a book for an army, and they're working on that kind of an isolated situation where, well, here's our big weakness of our army. What can we do about this? And they're fixing it. And now those weaknesses traditional weaknesses aren't there. And that's one of the things that's on the survey.
It's unbalanced. In some armies they've fixed it a lot, and other armies they haven't really fixed it. So
yes.
Yeah.
So anyway. And then what do you have? More fixed buffs?
And this is a more fixed buff. So we're talking about having like these buff wagons and things. This goes back to the more common magic items and such.
Like banner standards.
Like having just more standards that do. They only affect one unit. It's a minor change to that particular one unit, and that's what you get.
Right.
I think Kings of War does that quite well. You have a lot of items that you can just pay some points and you just add it to your unit.
Adds to the unit.
Adds something, and there's already some neat banners. And back to the, talking about not having, enough banners on the table. You don't see that many magic banners just because you don't have enough options to take them. And when you can take them, you tend to see the same. There just aren't that many to choose from. So
those are the ones that are,
there just aren't a lot of them.
Right.
It'd be nice to have more of those. And I like the
little minor
little minor ones. I'm not talking about 60-point banners that do something crazy, but the little minor ones, the 10-point and the 15-point banners that do minor things that really help you. That's kind of
give one unit
neat.
Something like a -1 to be shot at.
Something
simple.
Exactly.
Right.
And you can make those. As I said, you can make those army specific. Well, you should make them army specific. That's what we talked about before. But those are just those are simple buffs that. They don't bother me because it's minor. It only affects the one unit, and I know at the beginning of the game that guy's got that,
and I can deal with it, whether I stay away from it.
You know how I deal with it, as long as it's not something that's just too strong.
Correct.
It's not going to be stacked with 18 other things.
Yes. All right. There's the buffs. Oops. Skip something. There we go. Special rules. Simplify.
So one of the things that I think Ninth Age did, which I think was really nice, is they basically tried to standardize a lot of the army-specific rules into a standard special rule set.
Correct.
And they incorporated them into the rules. Now, since then, I've noticed there's been a bit of a creep that a lot of special rules have gotten back into the army books.
The army books, yes.
So, which is a whole other thing. But the one thing is, there's a lot of special rules, and I think a number of them, you start wondering, how many units have this rule?
Right.
Is it really worth having
a rule
like lightning attacks? It's really not like having a rule for that. Can it be the same as something else? Or I've got, like poison and toxic attacks. They're different rules. Hardly anybody has toxic attacks.
Right.
And does you really have to have a different rule for it? Can you just use poison?
Right.
My big one is wards and
wards and regions.
Regen.
Yes.
So Ninth Age's work to try to make wards and regions somewhat different.
Right.
By affecting what negates each. But otherwise, they're basically the same rule. Is it really necessary to? If you're going to make them different, make them different. Make
like
wards.
Make regions the thing at the end of the turn. You regen your
correct.
wounds.
Wards affect you. You roll on wounds wounds before multi wounds or whatever, and regens after all wounds are determined. Make it different. So it's worth being a separate. Other rules. Well, what's the point of really?
What's the real point of being?
It's really kind of the same thing. They've kind of done it with armor to a certain degree with mounts protection.
Right.
It's kind of more generic, and you call it whatever you want. It represents many things. This is a set of rules. It doesn't have to be descriptive to every little thing.
Right.
It's just a mechanic. So I think things like that could. Is it important? No. It's just something that I think would help clean things up a little bit.
Yeah.
Make it a little more straightforward. Reduces the barrier to entry on some of the special rules for. Put some of them together.
And while we're there, because I don't think we talked about it anywhere else, was Stomp and Thunder Stomp.
Yes.
Is another thing. Why doesn't that giant? Why can't a large target stomp on a medium target?
Right.
Just stomp, not
Yes.
Thunder Stomp. Stomp.
Yeah.
And where is Thunder Stomp from anyway?
Well, I argued something totally different. I don't understand why Thunder Stomp and Stomp are even in the game.
Right.
When Warhammer did it, it was the way to boost monsters and monstrous troops so they'd be more effective against rank and file.
Right.
And they had all these books that they had to worry about, so they couldn't just change the stat lines.
Correct.
Because that was money, and it took them 8 years to release
8 years
their
to
books,
go through a release of
unless
books.
you had Kingdom of Equitaine, and then it just didn't
And
bother.
then you got ignored.
Exactly. Just add the attacks to the monsters profile. Because the other thing about Stomps and Thunder Stomps, it's automatic hit.
Right.
There's nothing you can do about that.
Correct.
Yeah.
No, I mean that would be the solution. Add it to the profile.
Just add it to the profile. If you have a Stomp, give them an extra attack.
Yeah.
It makes them scare, but at least they can miss occasionally.
Right.
The saves work. You don't have to worry about special attack rules and all that thing. Same thing with Thunder Stomps. If you want to make monsters a little more monstery,
give them 4 or 5 more attacks.
Give them
more attacks.
3, 4 more attacks. So whatever it is. So
it'll make them more effective against things they can't normally stomp.
Correct.
But is that such a bad thing?
It's such a bad thing because, to your point, some of the things that they can't stomp is kind of odd.
Right.
It's only infantry.
Which kind of brings us to points.
Yes.
Which is kind of one thing we've talked about.
Aren't we making points?
No, we're making no points. If you live or listen to us, we make no points.
I'd say they were good points.
Okay, there you go.
No.
And what you've said before, it's anything is fine as long as it's pointed appropriately.
Yes.
However big killy something is, as long as you're paying for that, it's okay.
And no matter how hard the 19 tries, because there are so many filters with multiple die rolls, so many factors that have to be compensated, so many things that have to be good against this versus that, you're never going to come up with a perfect point system that makes everything perfectly balanced. There's always going to be
I agree
situational challenges. That's just the way it is.
And
all games are that way, unless you play checkers.
Yes.
Play checkers if you want
identical.
If you want things to be identical, that's the best you can do.
Yeah, or Kings of War.
Kings of War is a close second, yeah.
But no, I had to get that one in there. And you can see that on this screen we've got here. We've talked about Cav. It's not pointed appropriately for what they are. They cost way too much for what they are. They're paying way too much for their movement.
The light calves usually okay.
Correct.
But although maybe the better elite cav may cost. When I compare like the riders of
which one?
The Elaine riders.
Elaine, right? Yes.
Compare those with the Goblin Wolf riders. They're substantially more costly. Yeah, they'll beat those Wolf riders, but on the battlefield,
are they going to beat troops better?
They're not really,
Well, they're going to clear all that little chaff better, much better, and
without
taking damage is the big thing. They can clear chaff without taking damage, is what they're paying for, I think.
Are they really? You got 5, strength 4.
You got 5 strength 4 that are going before anything, and you're hitting.
That's your thing.
A lot of times you're hitting on 2s. So
but you're still not going to fight, anything with any decent toughness. You're not going to fight,
and you're not going to go into a unit.
Yeah, exactly. So are they better enough to cost as much more than it? So that's the question, and that's a tough one to deal with. But then we look at the heavy cavalry. Now you're talking about stuff that's going to be in the mid-20s usually, or 30 points. Are they really because they had the movement and armor bonus? Are they so much are they really that effective to give compared to infantry that can put 4 wounds against them?
Right.
I have half as much armor, but I got 4 wounds.
I got 4 wounds to your 1.
To your 1,
Right.
I only have to get 1 through.
Right.
Yeah, you might kill 2 of me, but
If 4, again, like we said
exactly.
before, if it's
Depending
4.
on what it is, unless it's the most
Yeah.
elite guys,
Right.
So, yeah, the points on cavalry, I think they're the spread's too great, and I think they're a little high compared to the infantry, and compared, frankly, to the monstrous cav, which
Right.
seems to be much more effective for the points, just because of the number of wounds, number of attacks that they put out.
Correct. And toughness.
Yes,
Toughness and armor, you combine those two, and it's a big thing. Weapons, again, we covered weapons a lot before.
But the points, for example,
points
a lot of times a lance costs 15 points
Right.
for a boost. For
That
1 round of
happens
combat.
only on the turn you
On
charge. Not even the first turn. The turn
Exactly.
you charge.
Whereas a great weapon, you lose your initiative, but you get it every turn.
Right.
15 points.
15 points.
You know.
Yes.
Halberds tend to cost a point more. Yeah, you get a +1 strength, but I'm giving up against a shield. I'm giving up a armor save.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get as many attacks. I don't have a lethal strike. I have the equivalent of armor piercing.
Right.
By
being strength. Better.
Right, but I'm paying a point more for that, and it's particularly if you're talking about 5 or 6 or 8 point guys. That's a huge premium.
Yeah, it is.
Not a big deal if I'm paying 20 points a model, but
Yeah.
but if I'm paying for cheap guys, that's a big premium for arguably no additional combat effectiveness. It's just, I think you'd see more halberds if they just costed the same.
Right.
And then shields and armor, quite often you'll see like a light armor upgrade is 1 point, and the shield is 2 points, and it does the exact same thing
For a mounted guy, who doesn't get the parry bonus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like it does the exact same thing, unless I have a certain weapon I can't. In some cases, it does less because I can't use the shield in close combat because of my weapon. So why am I paying this premium for this? It doesn't doesn't make sense. That's kind of where on the armor. So and you see those types of things, and some troops just. It's like some of the upgrades. I guess they don't want people to take them, or they're not sure. And I think that was part of the design. We'll add it, but we're not sure what it's going to be, so we'll cost it kind of high.
Mm-hmm.
I think like the heavy armor upgrade on the Knight's Aspirant.
Yes,
it's 4 points. It's like,
right.
Is it really worth that much? Probably not.
Yeah, but I mean, you do have to look at what it does to the unit.
Absolutely.
I mean, then that's what we've always talked about.
Yes.
Again, it needs to be appropriate.
And I think they're going to be working on points from now until the end of time. Because
there'll always be adjusting points.
That's just the nature. It's complex. It's not something that's easy to do. But I do think.
And as the meta changes too, that kind of affects that as well.
And the math hammer, you can look at it because there's also a big difference in a +1 armor save when I'm a 6 to a 5. Okay, in theory, it doubled my save possibility, but in practicality, with all the armor piercing and everything, it didn't. I guess
it may have given you a save when you don't have one, or
you can say it's that. But is that so good? Well, frankly, it's not as good as going from a 2 to a 1.
No, it's not.
Or if going from a 3 to a 2, or for a 5 to a 4. It's just that sliding scale. So those impacts are. It is somewhat. It's a hard thing to point out, no question.
And then we're balancing troop costs versus effectiveness.
Yeah. So I mean, this is a challenge of, and you can see this writing on the boards too. Is how do you make core more effective, and people want to take core, and we talked a little bit about other ways to do that by making them take it in other contexts and maybe not having special units so prominent in the game. But the other thing too is it's back to points. Well, if I take a big block of goblins and I put it against an equal points of swordmasters, or against dwarven pick a dwarf, or against ogres, are the goblins going to beat any of those units? And the answer is no.
No, they're not. They're going to stay around and get
they're
beat
going
up
to have
longer
more guys
if the general's around.
Right, but because they were even capped too at 60 models, I can't even put enough points of goblins to face off against that block of 40 swordmasters. Because even if I wanted to, so you get the bonus of general. So your only thing is you're just absorbing punishment.
Right.
Well, you shouldn't be paying such a points premium
to absorb punishment.
For do that,
Yeah, and people will say that exactly what I just did is that, like, okay, yeah, my 60 goblins can hold up to the 20, whatever it is, even 15 sword masters. Those 15 sword masters are just going to be butchering me every round.
Yep.
And it's an equal point units. They're going to be hammering me every round. I'm going to be losing this combat by tons. The steadfast rule's in place to do it. And you say, okay, well, you're going to be steadfast 9. Well, my unit's steadfast
Right.
6.
And my points were based on steadfast 6.
My unit's steadfast 6, not 9.
I have a other rule that
And are you
covers that up.
And then so now I have to include the price of my general standing nearby
yes.
into that equation. You can't just do those and say, okay, well, you're in the bubble, so
Right.
because you're paying for the general to hang around there and keep them protected. So again, you're right. It's just needs to be effectiveness.
So yeah, so you'd like just to see that that big horde of guys not only can just stand up and not die and get run down, but actually has a chance to win just because it's so much bigger.
Correct.
And there's just different ways. There's just different ways, and some of that's just points.
Right.
Some of it's just back to special rules again. But not the horde formation. But maybe they do have fight in next rank. So I think the goblins do when they get to a certain point, right?
The goblins what? Fight an extra rank?
Yeah.
Only if they do. The general has that ability.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
It's a special thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's those things you can do. But
And,
that's what has to be.
I hate to say this, but I must have double skipped a page because we missed magic.
No, we did. So we'll go back to it.
So we have magic.
Yes.
Multi-arcane items for mages. The arcane magic items. And
there are some wonderful arcane magic
there
items.
are some great ones.
Nothing fantastic, but little things that are just cool.
And we talked about this when we went through the magic items.
Yep.
For the arcane stuff. Most armies are going to have 2 mages.
Yep.
At best. I mean, on a rare occasion, you'll see 3.
Right.
Okay. But when somebody's running 3, they're keeping them cheap, so they're probably not buying magic items anyway.
And now with conclaves, you probably won't.
Yeah.
You're lower likely to see 2.
But there's some fantastic magic items in there, and most armies have 2 mages, and you're going to see 2 magic items almost every time.
Yep.
You're going to see the Dispel Scroll, which is a standard. If you've got a mage, you're going to have almost guaranteed to have a Dispel Scroll on the first one. And then the second one will most likely have the +1 to cast, +1 to dispel item. So what, even if it's allowing the higher level mage, right now, paying the premium for that higher level mage gives you an additional spell, which is not great. And that's kind of what you're getting out of it, and +1 to cast and dispel.
But you're paying a huge.
But you're paying a huge premium for that. Allow that guy to even if you don't allow it to all mages, even maybe allow that guy to take 2. Maybe allow that guy to double up and take a second one.
I'd actually wouldn't even limit it to 2. I'd like to limit it to. You have to take a look at it to make sure you don't have stacking again. But there's also a number of one-use only items in the arcane section.
Right.
I just say you take them up to your point limit. There's just no limit on, since only mages can take them. It's not like anyone else can take them.
That's true.
Just you can take as many as you want. If you want to use up all your magic slots for arcane items, have at it.
Go ahead and do it.
Most of them, let's say there's one use only scrolls or of some sort. So
yeah. Then the next bullet point.
Pathmaster for all.
Yes. We talked about this. It's kind of silly. You've got these mages, and you're going into a battle, and you're like, all right, what do you do for me? I don't know. Let's get there, and we'll find out.
Exactly.
It's kind of the opposite of any other part of your army.
Absolutely, because you plan everything else, then you got this thing, and you talk about synergies and planning and all of these things. And then you go through, I lost the game because I needed to get, one of 2 spells on this list.
Right.
And I just didn't roll that.
And I didn't have it.
Because I didn't roll that 3 or some doubles, I don't have the synergy spell that I need.
Right.
And what's the...
Right.
You don't tend to see that in other game systems. You tend to actually buy the spells you want to use,
Correct. And, maybe that's an option. Maybe buy the spells. But Pathmaster for all, even if it means the lower level guy can only have the 1 through 4 spell.
Right.
And the high level guy can have
3, whatever. Yeah.
Whatever that number is. And the high guy can have the ones above that as
Right.
well. To, again, differentiate between the 2 levels of spellcasters.
There needs to be
which
more
are not
reasons
there.
to take the high level magic users.
Correct, or they won't show
The
up.
+1 to cast is not enough for the points that you're paying for that guy.
Right. But, again, Pathmaster for all. I'm a big fan of this
Yes.
one. It's
Yeah.
like, I've got my mage. I know what he can do. That's why I'm bringing him.
Exactly. And then
I didn't bring this guy with me to sit around and figure out what he could do before the battle starts, and then I can
Yep.
figure out if he's useless or not.
Exactly.
Right?
And then you'll spells get used, and then you have what you need. You chose the lore. That's your tactical decision for most armies.
Right.
Which lores you're going to use and what the synergies you want to use with those lores. So you've overcome that. So now you just you use what you want.
But when I say Pathmaster for all, though, I'm kind of more of the. This is on your army list. You write on your army list what spells you have.
Yes.
You don't go into a game and choose what spells you have.
No.
It's on your army list going in.
Right.
I'm taking this spell and this spell.
Oh, I see what you're saying. No,
Pathmaster.
I'm seeing it in the context that you have to choose your lore.
And then the actual Pathmaster ability would then let you choose spells before each game.
Right.
But I think mages out of the box should be able to come with a set spell.
Yeah, no, I prefer this. You have access to certain spells, and those are the spells you have access to.
Going into each battle you
Right,
select.
right. I didn't. That's one thing I don't like about Kings of War is, you just get these certain spells. It becomes a very generic.
Well, Kings of War, they're very generic.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, I'm taking Lore of Light, and I'm taking the...
Right. I'm just saying, I'm taking
This
Lore
and
of
this.
Light, and I've got a level 2 guy. That means I have access to the 4 spells. I have those 4 spells.
Oh, okay.
I can only cast so much in a turn anyway.
Oh, you're saying you have all 4 spells.
You have all 4 spells.
Oh.
You still got to cast them.
You're saying you don't even choose them.
Right.
Oh, okay. That's even better.
Yeah.
I was looking at it where
Because
it
they've
was,
made Magic harder with this version of 9th edition. It's harder to cast spells anyway.
correct.
With only a +1 or +2. Most is +3. A lot of the points that you have to, how many dice you have to roll to get the spells off, you don't tend to have, with a few exceptions, you don't tend to get a lot of spells off anyway.
Right.
So having the ones that you need against a particular army could actually make the difference in some cases of you being able to play, against a certain opponent.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
And if we're talking about, especially if we're talking about, all comers tournaments, you don't know what you're going to face.
Right.
It's not like ETC where I'm gonna plan to go against evil guys,
Right.
so I'm gonna take light magic.
But even if you do have that, even if you do have to do it with an all-comers list, at least that way you say, okay, I need my mage to do this, and then these are the 2 spells he needs, so these are the spells I'm taking. You know what I'm saying?
No, I know what you're saying. I just think
write
it
them down or
turns
whatever,
out that only like 2 spells in every list end up getting used.
that's true too.
Because they're not equal.
They're definitely not equal.
They're all different.
Right.
And a lot of them are situational. But there are
Yes.
situations that you'd like to use that spell,
Right.
and you would actually take it in certain situations. So
Right.
you like to have that option to go there.
That's a good point.
And it's back to richness of the technical decisions. It's not just part of the game is army building. That's part of the fun, but
Right.
that's the army. And that to me, that's the choice. I took this lore because it's going to synergize with my build in this way or that way.
Right.
Now I'm on the tabletop, and I got to figure out how to maneuver my units and who's going to fight who. And it's like, okay, part of that decision point, which is I think which spell am I going to use first? Which one am I
Right.
going to do? Oh, you only got 2 spells. I don't. It's,
Yeah, I know what 2 spells you have.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is I know what your other spell is, so I can take this one. And I don't
How many
care what
times have we lost track in a game? It's like, what'd you have again?
Right. What do you have?
Oh shit! I
again?
should have stopped
Yeah.
that.
It's
Yeah.
a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just adds it adds flavor and it doesn't hurt the game any.
Okay. So that was Magic. That picked up the missing page.
The missing link.
The missing link. Because I was got down to the end. I'm like, we never talked about this. And I was like, okay.
Yes.
Well. So that's kind of our wish list. It's actually turned out to be quite a list, didn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty. I mean, look at all the paper that Ninth Age teams put out. I mean, you got a pretty
Yes.
substantial rule book. You got army books. You got all this other stuff. So
Yeah, the Lords of Magic, everything.
yeah, but as I said, these are just our ideas. I mean, we're nobody, but I mean, we're veteran gamers. We've been gaming for a long time.
In multiple systems.
Multiple systems.
Yeah.
Written our own rules.
Yeah.
The run tournaments, run open games, done scenario design. So it's not like we just came to the party.
Yes.
Not to say that there aren't smarter people in the North Age team. There
I'm
absolutely
sure there are.
But these are just things that we've seen in the game that we think that could make it even better than it already is.
Yeah, a lot of these I would love to see. I'd love to see any of these changes.
Yeah.
But that's what we have.
Yeah. And for what it's worth.
And again, like I said at the beginning of this, there's definitely no criticism of what's been done at this point, because this has been the best fantasy battle system I've played in ever, and we've played in a few.
And we're only here
and for years,
making you waste your time listening to us or tuning us out because we really believe in the system.
Yes,
and the project.
Yeah, and that's kind of why we've jumped on board with this whole thing and
Yeah.
started doing these recordings and everything. All right. Well, if you stuck with us this long, thanks for listening. And we'll be back with something else at some point.
Something else, some other drivel. So, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Bye.